If you have ever given your soul to a family that only remembered you when they needed something, then vanished when you were the one bleeding, this story is for you. Stay with me, because this isn't about revenge. It's about remembering who the hell you are. My name is Ava Morgan, and for 28 years, I was the glue, the pillar, and the ghost in my own home. We were a deeply traditional family from the red clay of Georgia, the kind of family that looked perfect in Christmas cards and fell apart behind closed doors. My father was a man of quiet, unshakable principles, or so I thought. My mother was the keeper of appearances, a curator of public perception. And my siblings, Caleb and Hannah, they were the beautiful, broken things that I was expected to fix. I was the oldest, the responsible one. The role was assigned to me before I could even spell the word. It started small, as these things always do. Mending scraped knees, finishing homework they'd forgotten, telling the white lies that covered their minor transgressions. But the stakes grew with me. At 22, I was living and breathing code in a cramped San Francisco apartment that smelled perpetually of stale coffee and ozone. I had just landed my first significant contract for the tech startup I was building from scratch. It was a six-figure deal that validated every sleepless night, every sacrifice. It was the first time I felt a real sense of accomplishment, of my own power. That same week, my parents sat me down at the kitchen table during a visit home, the one with the familiar scratch on the leg from when I was 7, and tipped my chair back too far. They didn't congratulate me on the contract I just told them about. They slid a thick manila envelope across the worn oak. Foreclosure notice. The words were stark and merciless. They were behind on the mortgage. This wasn't a threat. It was a promise waiting at the end of the month. I didn't hesitate. It didn't even feel like a choice. I looked at their tired faces, my father's jaw set in stoic shame, my mother's eyes darting around as if the neighbors could see through the walls, and I saw a problem that needed a solution. My solution. I returned to California and I systematically dismantled my future. I drained my business accounts, taking the seed money that was meant for servers and staff. I sold my car, a beat-up but beloved convertible I'd bought with my first internship check. I lived on instant noodles and bitter, black coffee for more than a year, pouring every ounce of profit not into growth, but into their debt. My own dreams could wait. Family was forever. The day I made the final payment, I drove to their house with a bottle of champagne, my heart swelling with a naive, daughterly pride. I handed them the paid-in-full notice, the paper crisp and official. My mother looked at it, her lips a thin, unimpressed line. "Well," she said, setting it on the counter next to a pile of coupons, "it's good you're finally putting that computer hobby to good use." My father just nodded, his eyes fixed on the flickering television screen. "We raised you to be responsible." There was no hug, no toast, no thank you, just the quiet hum of the refrigerator and the weight of their expectations settling back onto my shoulders, heavier than before. That should have been my first lesson, that my value was not in who I was, but in what I could provide. 2 years later, it was Caleb, my brilliant, charming, spiraling younger brother, the golden boy who could talk his way into or out of anything. The first call came from a hospital in Athens. He'd overdosed on painkillers. My mother's voice on the phone wasn't panicked, it was annoyed, mortified. "You need to handle this, Ava," she'd said, her voice a sharp whisper. "Don't let the neighbors find out. Use your money. Find a private place." So I handled it. I spent days I should have been courting investors on the phone with addiction specialists. I found the best rehab facility in the state, a place with serene gardens and a price tag that made me physically ill. I convinced them to take him on a payment plan. I used the money I'd painstakingly rebuilt, the money that was supposed to be the down payment on my own small office space, a place with a real door and a window, and I paid for his recovery. When he got out, he lasted 6 months. The second time, the call came from a police station in the middle of the night. DUI, possession with intent to distribute. The charges were serious. This time, I didn't just pay for rehab. I paid for a high-powered lawyer who spoke in clipped, expensive sentences. I emptied my savings account to zero. Again, the dream of an office, of a life separate from their crises, dissolved into mist. I remember sitting across from him in the sterile visiting room, the glass between us cold and smudged. He wouldn't look at me, focusing instead on a crack in the linoleum floor. Why, Caleb? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. I don't understand. He finally lifted his head, and his eyes, the same blue as my father's, were filled not with gratitude, but with a bitter, searing resentment. It's easy for you, isn't it? He sneered, the words hitting me like stones. Miss Perfect, flying in on your little tech money broomstick. You probably love this. Getting to swoop in and save the day, reminding everyone how much better you are. He was my brother. I was mortgaging my entire life to keep him out of prison, and he saw my sacrifice as a personal attack, a judgment on his failure. That was the second lesson. To them, my help was not a gift. It was a weapon I was using against them. Then came Hannah, my beautiful, flighty, younger sister who chased dreams like they were butterflies, never staying in one place long enough to see them through. One of them caught her, and 9 months later she had a baby girl she named Leela. Hannah was not meant to be a mother. Her spirit was too wild, too restless. I saw the darkness gathering in her eyes, the panic of a cage door closing. I offered to help. I moved her and the baby into a bigger apartment with me in the city. I bought diapers and formula. I learned to code with one hand while rocking a crying infant with the other. I walked the floors with Leela at 3 a.m. so Hannah could sleep. One rainy Tuesday, I came home from a 17-hour workday, having closed a deal that would finally make my company solvent. I was exhausted but exhilarated, ready to celebrate. But the apartment was silent. A note was on the kitchen counter, weighted down by a half-empty baby bottle. I can't. You're better at this anyway. I'm sorry. And just like that, she was gone, to find herself in Bali or Peru or wherever her latest whim took her. And I was a mother to my niece. Leela was my world from that moment on. Her first word was Ava. Her first steps were toward me. I learned her cries, her laughs, the scent of her hair after a bath. I adjusted my entire life, my entire company, around this tiny, perfect human who had been left behind. I was 27 years old, a single parent, a CEO, and the sole emotional and financial pillar for a family that saw me as a utility. And through it all, the judgment never stopped. It was a constant, low-grade hum of disapproval. When I bought Leela the best organic food, my mother would purse her lips on our weekly video call. You're spoiling her. We raised you on canned peas and you turned out fine. When my company was featured in a tech journal, a small but significant milestone, my father would grunt, You don't need to keep showing off, Ava. It's unladylike. People will talk. During a Christmas visit, I fell asleep on the sofa, my laptop still open on the coffee table and Leela sleeping on my chest. Caleb, home for a brief, sober visit, shook his head with a condescending smirk. You're just trying to prove something. We get it. You're better than us. Not once, not one single time did anyone ask, Are you okay, Ava? Or how are you holding up? Or even a simple, blessedly simple, thank you. I was their emergency contact, their bank, their nanny, their scapegoat. I was the foundation of the house, buried underground, essential but invisible, unseen. And I accepted it, because I thought that was what love was. I thought that was what family meant. You carry the weight because you are strong enough to. Then my father died. The silence that followed was a different kind. It wasn't the passive silence of ingratitude. It was an active, weaponized silence. It was the silence of erasure. No one called me, not my mother, not Caleb, not even an aunt or a cousin who had my number for their kids' fundraiser requests. I found out on Facebook, a full week after it happened. An old high school acquaintance, someone I hadn't spoken to in a decade, sent me a message. A simple, well-meaning, Hey, I was so sorry to hear about your dad. Hope you're doing okay. The world just stopped. The air in my sunny California office became thin and sharp. I read the message again and again, my mind refusing to process the words. My father. Gone. It felt like a physical blow, a punch to the sternum that left me breathless, and no one told me. I called my mother. It went a voicemail, her cheerful, recorded voice a grotesque counterpoint to the grief clawing at my throat. I called Caleb. Voicemail. I left frantic, choked messages. I booked the first red-eye from SFO to Atlanta. I threw clothes in a bag, my hands shaking so badly I could barely zip it. I told my nanny I had an emergency, hugged Leela so tightly she squirmed, and promised I'd be back soon. In an airport gift shop, I bought a shapeless black dress that felt like a costume. I bought a spray of white lilies, his favorite during my layover in Denver, the cloying, sweet scent filling the sterile cabin air. I walked through the flight, the drive, the arrival in a state of surreal, robotic shock. Part of me was still convinced it was a mistake, a horrible, cruel misunderstanding that we would all laugh about later. I walked up the stone path to the house I had paid for. The garden I had helped my father plant one hot summer was overgrown, choked with weeds. The paint on the porch was peeling. I knocked on the front door, my knuckles rapping against the wood I'd once refinished. My mother opened it. She was wearing a dark blue dress. Her eyes were red-rimmed, but when she saw me, holding my pathetic bouquet of flowers, they hardened into something I had never seen before. It wasn't grief. It wasn't anger. It was resolve. "What are you doing here?" she asked. Her voice was flat, devoid of any emotion. The lilies in my hand suddenly felt absurdly heavy, a prop in a play I didn't know I was in. "Mom, what? I heard about Dad. On Facebook. Why didn't anyone call me?" She looked me dead in the eye. She didn't flinch, and she said the words that would detonate the rest of my life. "You left this family the day you stopped needing us." I just stared at her. The logic was so twisted, so profoundly selfish, it was almost brilliant. To her, my independence wasn't an achievement, it was an abandonment. My strength wasn't a gift, it was a rejection. They didn't need my money anymore. Caleb was home. Leela was older in preschool, less of a burden on me and therefore less of a credit to them. My utility had expired, so I had too. She closed the door in my face. The click of the lock was the loudest sound I had ever heard. I stood there, on the porch of the house my name was on the deed for, holding flowers for a funeral I had already missed, and I was locked out. I turned and walked away, leaving the lilies on the doorstep like an offering to a god who had forsaken me. The days that followed were a blur of cold, hard facts discovered through the detached medium of the internet. I found the obituary online. My father was survived by his loving wife, Mary, and his devoted son, Caleb. My name was not there. It was like I had never been born. A friend who had attended the service out of respect for my father sent me a hesitant, apologetic text. The eulogy delivered by Caleb spoke of a tight-knit, perfect family. A father, a mother, a son. A sacred trinity. No mention of a daughter, no mention of me. And then came the final cut, the reading of the will. I wasn't invited, but my lawyer, the one I'd had on retainer since Caleb's second arrest, a man whose pragmatism I now clung to like a life raft, insisted I attend. We sat in the back of a stuffy legal office that smelled of old paper and deceit. My mother and Caleb sat at the front, dressed in solemn black, looking for all the world like the sole, grieving heirs. The lawyer cleared his throat and read my father's last will and testament, dated 5 years prior. It was simple. It was brutal. The house, the land my investments had protected from seizure, his pension, his savings, everything. All of it was left to his son, Caleb Morgan. My name was not mentioned once. I was erased, not forgotten, erased. Caleb had the decency to look down at his hands, a flicker of something, shame, maybe, or just the discomfort of a lie well told on his face. My mother, however, stared straight ahead, her expression one of grim, righteous satisfaction. They had finally done it. They had written me out of my own life. I didn't scream, I didn't cry, I didn't beg them to look at me to explain. I felt nothing. A profound, terrifying, hollow calm. The part of me that had spent a lifetime craving their approval, that had lived on the scraps of their attention, had finally, blessedly, died in that room. I walked out, my lawyer trailing behind me, murmuring condolences. I went back to my anonymous hotel room. I didn't order room service. I didn't turn on the TV. I just sat in the dark, watching the city lights blink on, feeling like one of them, distant, cold, and utterly alone. The ghost in their house had become a ghost in my own skin. But what they didn't know, what my mother in her calculated cruelty and my brother in his weak compliance had overlooked, was my father. My quiet, complicated father. He wasn't a man of many words, but he was a man of routines. And one of those routines was technology. I had set up his entire digital life years ago. His email, his accounts, his cloud backup that synced every single night at 2 a.m., a digital ghost of his life humming away on a server farm in Nevada. Out of a desperate, flickering need to find one last piece of him, a photo, an old email, a final word that wasn't filtered through my mother's bitterness, I logged into his cloud account. I wasn't looking for a weapon. I was looking for a memory. The password was, of course, my birthday. The irony was a bitter pill that I swallowed down. I scrolled through folders of photos, me as a gap-toothed kid, Caleb at graduation, Hannah at her wedding. I saw tax documents, old letters, and then I saw it. A file created just 3 weeks before he died. Its digital timestamp was a beacon in the dark. The file name was Final Will Updated, PDF. My hand trembled as I moved the cursor. I clicked. It opened, and I read. It was a new will, properly drafted, digitally signed and timestamped by an online notary service I recognized, one of the most secure on the market. It was clean, legal, and ironclad. It began with a short, handwritten note he must have scanned and inserted on the first page. His familiar, spidery script was a punch to the gut. For Ava, you were the only one who ever built anything. The rest of us just took. This is all yours, you earned it. Forgive an old man for not having the courage to say it to your face. Tears finally came. Not tears of grief for his loss, but tears of a validation so profound it felt like I could breathe for the first time in my life. He hadn't erased me. He had seen me. At the very end, in the quiet of his own conscience, he had finally, truly seen me. And then in stark legal language, the document laid everything out. The house, the land, the savings, everything. It was all left to me, Ava Morgan, his daughter. The story was suddenly so clear. My family had found the printed copy he'd made. They had destroyed it, thinking it was the only one. They had taken the older, obsolete will, the one from before I paid off the house, before I raised their grandchild, and passed it off as his final wish. It wasn't just immoral. It was a felony. It was fraud. It was estate tampering. The hollow place inside of me began to fill up, not with rage, not with grief, but with a cold, clear, diamond-hard purpose. I didn't call them. I didn't send a warning shot. They had communicated with me through lawyers and locked doors and silence. I would respond in kind. The next morning, I was back in my lawyer's office. He looked at me with pity until I spoke. I didn't tell him the whole emotional, sordid story. I didn't need to. I just slid my laptop across his desk. "This is my father's actual will," I said, my voice steady. "The one they read yesterday was a fraud. I want to sue. I want to reclaim everything. And I want to press charges for tampering." He looked from the document to the digital signature to the timestamp. Then he looked at me, and for the first time in my life, I saw the kind of respect I had been starving for. It wasn't from my family. It was from a stranger who understood the language of facts and justice. The legal battle was swift and brutal. My mother and Caleb were deposed in a sterile conference room with fluorescent lights that hummed louder than their lies. I watched, silent, as their stories crumbled under the weight of digital forensics. The timestamps, the IP addresses from my father's computer, the sworn video testimony from the online notary who had witnessed my father's signature. Their greed had made them sloppy. They never imagined I would find it. They never imagined I would fight back. They still saw me as the dutiful daughter who would eventually absorb the pain and disappear. They misjudged me. They had erased the daughter. They had no idea about the woman she'd been forced to become. In less than 4 months, it was over. The court invalidated the fraudulent will. The true will was executed. The house, the land, and even punitive financial damages were awarded to me. My mother and Caleb were left with nothing but their own choices and the looming possibility of criminal charges, which, in a final act of cold mercy, I declined to pursue. Prison was too simple. I wanted them to live with the consequences, to sit in the silence they had created. I owned it all. The house where I was dismissed, the land where I was ignored, the money I had already earned 10 times over. But I never set foot in that house again. It was a mausoleum of a life I no longer wanted, so I sold it. I sold all of it. And I sat with the result, a bank account with a number so large it felt unreal. I could have vanished, lived a quiet life with Leela, and never looked back. But the money felt haunted. It was the price of my own erasure. And then I started the real work. I took the money, every penny from the sale, every dollar from the damages, and I used it to build something new, something they could never touch, something that turned my pain into a purpose. I launched a national nonprofit foundation. I called it the Ghost Daughter Initiative. It's a sanctuary for women like me, women who have been written out of their own lives, women who were the caregivers, the providers, the fixers, only to be discarded when their families were done with them. We provide legal aid to fight fraudulent wills and financial abuse. We offer trauma counseling to help them rebuild their sense of self. We give grants for them to start over, to build lives of their own, far from the shadows that tried to swallow them. My face, the one my mother couldn't bear to look at, started showing up in magazines and on morning news shows. My voice, the one they tried to silence, was now on podcasts and in interviews telling my story. Not for fame, not for pity, but for every other woman sitting in the dark thinking she is alone. I wanted her to know she was. I wanted her to know that her power was not the problem, it was the solution. The initiative became my life's work, my true home, a family forged not by blood or obligation, but on shared strength and radical reclamation. 1 year to the day after the court case settled, my assistant buzzed my office. "Ava, there's a Mr. Caleb Morgan here to see you. He doesn't have an appointment." I felt a tremor, a faint echo of the past, but it was distant, muffled. I took a deep breath, the air in my own office clean and bright, and told her to send him in. He walked in, and he was a stranger in a wrinkled suit. The golden boy charm was gone, replaced by a desperate, hollowed-out look. His eyes were watery. He stood awkwardly in the middle of my bright, sunlit office, a space I had designed, a world I had built, a life they had no part in. "Ava," he started, his voice thick with a performance of remorse. I'm so sorry for everything. I was weak. Mom, she pushed me. But I've changed. I'm in a program. I'm trying to make things right. But I'm in trouble. I need help, just a little to get back on my feet. You're still my sister, right?" He was playing the old song, the one that had worked every single time before. The broken boy, waiting for his sister to fix him one last time. I stood up from my desk and walked toward him. I stopped just a few feet away, close enough to see the calculation in his tear-filled eyes. The ghost of the girl I used to be was finally, blessedly, gone. There was no anger left, no pain, just peace, a quiet, unshakable boundary where a wound used to be. He was waiting for an answer, for a yes, a no, a lecture. I gave him the only thing I had left to give him, the truth. I looked him in the eye and said, "You erased me. Now live with the silence you gave me." If that story hit a little too close to home, you are not alone, you are not invisible, and you are not what they tried to make you. Share this with someone who needs to hear that their strength is not a sin. Leave a comment and tell us about the moment you remembered who you are. And if you have ever been written out of your own life, don't you dare go quiet. You were never the problem. You were the power.